So I guess this is my clicker, right? Hi, everybody. In 2016, it was my 22nd anniversary of having immigrated into the United States. It had been 22 years in which, after the day that I crossed the border and came from Mexico into the United States as a new mother with a 2-month-old baby, and knowing very little English, just enough to be very confused. And it had been almost 22 years of having stepped for the first time into a public library. And having been at the children's book section, I'm finding that they were treasures that I have never even imagined existed. And it had been almost 22 years that I fell in love with picture books, because picture books open up to me this marvelous opportunity to, just like children, to understand even a text that is in a different language, or maybe a language that you don't know how to read yet, and that you get to understand it, because the magic of picture books is that if you don't understand the words, if you don't understand but only a few of the words, you can always look at the images and figure out what the story was about. It had been almost 22 years of deciding that I wanted to learn how to make books like the ones I have seen at the library and the ones that I admire so much. And as I was celebrating those 22 years, I could realize that my story was already old. That story was old already. It's been 22 years, and I was already actually making my own books. That was the year in which Rudas came out, and Thunderboy Jr. came out as well. It was a year after I had received the Pura Belpré Award for my book, Viva Frida, and I had also received a Caldecott Honor. And I start feeling that that story is not anymore who I am. Now I'm doing other things. It was part of who I was, but now I'm making my books. And I was writing a story about a dog that is stolen by the hurricane. This is a graphic novel. And as I'm doing all of that, the campaign for presidential race started. And then we had a candidate talking about immigrants and how when people from Mexico was sent into the United States, they didn't send the best. I was sent somehow. And if that touches me in the sense of who an immigrant is, I can only imagine how it is like for children. When Donald Trump got elected, many of the children of my friends, little children, they cried because they were the children of immigrants, and they were scared. And I don't know if that happened to you, but it happened to me that everything that I was doing, it kind of stopped and it didn't make sense anymore. So I was writing a story about this dog that is stolen by the hurricane, and it might still be valid somehow, but in a way I felt like, is this all I can do right now? Just watch and see things happen. Suddenly, even that story didn't seem very relevant. And I talked to other authors and other illustrators like Dance and Tent and a bunch of other people, and they were telling me, I felt the same. I couldn't work anymore. I felt like that. Then I had to put my work aside. I didn't know what I was going to be doing with that. And I just kind of walk around my studio not knowing what was next, because what I was doing, it just didn't feel that important anymore. And I was like that for a long time. I was visiting schools and I was doing some conferences, but then I realized that I I wasn't producing what my voice really wanted to say. And in fact, I didn't really know what I was gonna do next. And then my editor and my agent reminded me that I had agreed a while ago to talk about and write about my immigration story. But then I had been thinking, like, what do I say about my immigration story? I came to the United States when I was an adult. How can that relate to children? I was a mother, can children really understand, like, if what I felt, is it relatable to them? And then I remember that I actually didn't come alone. I came with my 2-month-old son. And that was his story as well. And as the panelists were here, and they were being asked, how do you make a story about a big subject available for children? And I don't know that if I had been asked that question, I will know the answer. Most of the time, I don't. Most of the time, I guess I have to start small. And sometimes I have to start from the unexpected and to think about the things I feel. Do I feel strength? Do I feel vulnerability? Do I feel fear? Do I feel that I want to actually find answers? And I started trying to tell my own immigration story, because I do know 1 or 2 things about what it's like to come to a new country. And then things started. So the story of Dreamers started very small, as most of the things I do, very, very small, with very little drawings. I learned almost 24 years ago that these drawings are called thumbnails because they are not bigger than my thumb. They are very small, and that's how I usually start my work. And just making these drawings and trying to figure out what a story is gonna be saying. I love drawing. Drawing was my first love, because I realized that if you take your pencil and you start moving your hand and you put that pencil on a piece of paper, it is like magic. It really is like magic. You make one line and it doesn't look like anything, but you add another one and it starts taking shape. And maybe you make a little squiggle or something, and then amazingly it looks like something else, and you just keep going, and eventually a drawing will start appearing. It was always like magic. So my work always starts with these traces, with these just sometimes they come from nowhere, a line and a shape, and they start taking shape, and then they start telling a story. Now, this will never make just a children's book, I know. These are just little drawings, and they are so small. But what would a book really is make, more than the materials or the drawings or the traces, is the feelings and the experiences. And it took me many hours on my table to start figuring out what my voice wanted to say. So this is the way I make a book, and this is the way I work in the story of Dreamers. And the story of Dreamers, I remind you then, is inspired in the things that I know about what it's like to immigrate. And most of what I do is, once I finish my little thumbnails and I have my map and my plan, then I start refining my work. And in this case, I made drawings on paper with ink. And I started interested in making art when I saw picture books for the first time. I was already kind of old. And at the time, I had never really painted, and the only things that I knew how to use was a pencil and an eraser. And when I knew that I wanted to make picture books, I needed to learn how I was gonna make images that could be in a book. But the fact is, I didn't know anything. So when I started creating art, everything I had it to figure it out. I had to figure it out. I didn't know it, so I could have chosen anything, watercolors, acrylics, color pencils, it didn't matter. I just had no idea how to use them, so I was gonna have to try to figure it out. And when people ask me, what is your favorite medium? I almost always tell them, I think that if I don't really have a medium, and maybe I don't even have a style. If I have a style, the style is, I'm gonna surprise me. Yeah. And most of the time is I have no idea how I'm gonna use it, but my mother had a saying when we were growing up, and she will always come up with, we will ask her things and she will give us an answer, and we will ask her, so how do you know that, Mom? How do you, and she will say, well, the thing is that I know everything. And whatever I don't know, I figure it out. And whatever I don't know, actually, I make it up. And in my process of learning how to create art, I realized that, and yes, since I didn't know how to make any of those things, maybe I could make it up. And I think that's what I've been doing for all these, almost, was that 20 years? I think it's gonna be like in my 19th year since I started making books. And almost every book, I always have to figure out something that I don't know how to do. And in this case, what I did is, more than thinking of materials and techniques, I thought about the things that were meaningful to me. And once we started drawings, I needed to color my work. And what I did is I took from a lot of things that surround me that are important to me. And like, for instance, the floor of my new studio in Mexico. I've been in Mexico working for the last 40 years. And in that place, I have found my reconnection with the place where I was born, and also my sense of looking for my new identity as a constant immigrant. And this is a photograph of the floor of my studio. This is a photograph from the floor of one of my neighbors. And this is the floor of another tile in my house. And this is the wall of my house as well. And you see this house. I took some photographs of the door and some of the textures. And what I've been doing is I put all of this in my computer and I start coloring the world that I'm gonna be creating. I went traveling to some of the towns in Mexico, and I took some pictures. And you might see them eventually in the artwork for Dreamers. Some of these murals, which I love, street art. I took the photographs and then I used them to start coloring inside the lines that I had created on paper and ink. I use many materials, so I bought a photograph and I scan. I took photographs of the plants in my garden, the plants inside my house. Some of the plants just by my door. I also had pictures of things like mushrooms and a bucket of water. All wood. When I went to live to Mexico, I didn't have a place where to work or where to actually spend the night. And I needed to find a place. And what I found, in fact, was what I like to call a Mexican ruin. And in this place, which was a very old house, I found a lot of material, like twine, but I found material like the one that they had to knock down some walls, and some of the old materials that were there were these fabulous textures and colors. And again, I put them inside my computer and I used them, and including this blouse that I had for maybe 30 years already. And these are some fabrics. I also scanned them. That chair, I took a photograph and I put it inside my computer. And from all of these momentous That's my comal. That's like a grilling metal sheet in which I make my quesadillas. And from all of these colors and all of these textures, I started creating the story that I was going to tell. This is tissue paper and craft paper. And this is a skirt that is used by the women of the area of Chiapas in Mexico. They are indigenous women that live in the mountains. They create their own wool skirts, and I have one. And I scan this material, and from all of these things that are meaningful to me, that are part of my culture, my story, the things that I love, the things that I want to know more about, and my exploration of what it's like to be Mexican and being connected to the symbolisms of the place where I was born, trying to bring them into telling a story of what it's like to come to a new country in which sometimes you feel like you almost have to ask for permission to come to, and that you have to constantly prove yourself that there is a good reason why you are here. I don't know if that has happened to you, that you are in a place in which you are feeling like, I don't really belong here. I don't really think that if people knew exactly who I am, they will find it that I am valuable enough to be here. I don't even know the language. I don't know if I contribute. Most people that come from countries like Mexico and all South and Central America had been conquered for almost 500 years. And in the act of conquest, they were not only conquered physically, but they were also conquered emotionally and mentally in a way that we have been told that, in fact, we are not as valuable as others. We don't need a president of the United States to tell us that might not be worth it, because sometimes we have been hearing that for a long, long time. And it's hard to come out of that and realize that when you come to a new place, when you immigrate, you don't come here. Immigrants do not come here to take. They don't only come here because there are much better opportunities, or because they are going to take over the economy of others. They actually come here bearing gifts. When people crosses borders from one side to the other, they might bring very little with them physically. But in fact, in those backpacks, in those suitcases, in those bags, they are bringing everything from their strength, their work, their hopes, their talents, their abilities, their passions, their dreams, and then even their colors and their food and the way of communicating, and then in another language, bring another language, another way of understanding each other. And they bring all of that so that then they all together, along with the people who receive them here, can create a better world, not only for them, not only for immigrants, but for their children and for everybody. So in telling this story, I wanted to take from my own experience and offer what I think that I might have brought when I came to the United States. Some of those things are things that I love, like the idea of the dogs, these eternal companions that from the Aztec times, they believe that they will accompany you to cross you to the river that will take you to the last place after you die. And also things such as the fauna and the flora of the place where I come from, a very humid and beautiful place that is always covered by fog. And things like these bands that I created when my son was little so that we could participate in San Francisco Carnival. and that I made I bought cotton fabric and I painted it with the first set of fabric paints that I found, and I tried my hand because I didn't even have brushes. I painted those outfits with my own fingers. And things like thread and my own childhood drawings. You can see what I liked when I was a child. That was me. And embroidery, like my mother taught me to do when I was about 5 years old. And also the inspiration. The books that I found at the library that showed me that perhaps there was a place for people like me in children's books. Books that sometimes spoke my language, books that sometimes didn't, but that opened up a world for me. And my own son's drawings. And his poetry. And the very first book that I made, that I handmade, following the instructions that I found in a book at the public library. And when I had all of these things together, I began making a book. And this is Dreamers. And if you allow me, I'm going to read it for the first time. So this is Dreamers by su servidora Yuyi Morales. And it begins like this. I dream of you, then you appear. Together we became amor, love, amor, resplendent life, you and I. One day, we bundled gifts in our backpacks and crossed a bridge outstretched like the universe. And when we made it to the other side, thirsty, in awe, unable to go back, we became immigrants. Migrantes, you and I. The sky and the land welcome us in words unlike those of our ancestors. There were so many things we didn't know. Unable to understand and afraid to speak, we made lots of mistakes. You and I became caminantes. Thousands and thousands of steps we took around this land until the day we found a place we had never seen before. Suspicious, improbable, unbelievable, surprising, unimaginable. Where we didn't need to speak, we only needed to trust, and we did. Books became our language. Books became our home. Books became our lives. We learned to read, to speak, to write, and to make our voices heard. Someday, we will become something we haven't even yet imagined. But right now, we are stories. We are two languages. We are lucha. We are resilience. We are hope. We are dreamers. soñadores of the world. We are love, amor, love. And that is the end of the story. When we finish a story, in Mexico, when I was a child, we always say like this, so I'm gonna say it so I can say goodbye to all of you. We say, y colorín colorado, este cuento se ha acabado. Thank you.